I remember last year when everyone said that 2024 was looking like a dry year for new releases after coming off the heels of last year, with the likes of Tears of the Kingdom, Alan Wake 2, and Baldur's Gate 3, just to name a few. It turned out that momentum continued to delight and surprise depending on where you looked and what type of games you're into. For me personally, I actually enjoyed the new releases I played this year more than last year, although I'm biased towards 3D platformers, so all it takes is there to be one good new one for me to be satisfied with the entire video game industry's output for the year. Out of everything I've played during 2024, there are 3 core games that are what I will forever think of first when I recall what released throughout this year. Without further ado, let's just jump straight into them. Although, what was the name of that first game? On the surface, 2 things stick out when taking your first glance at Astrobot. The first thing is that everything's a robot, from the birds and the bees to the clouds and the trees. Seeing environments like circuitry run through tree bark into the leaves gives Astrobot its own surreal Alice in Wonderland vibes that differentiate it from Mario's whimsical universe, Little Big Planet's stitched up world, or Kirby's starry dreamscape. Nothing's safe from being astrofied, so you never know what cute robotic thing you're going to encounter next. This helps set up the second thing that's prominent of Astrobot's visuals, which are the references to other video game characters and the overall connection to the PlayStation brand. There are squares, circles, triangles, and crosses galore, with bots dressed up in costumes sprinkled in. Most of the big Sony names you'd expect are present, but there are some deep cuts that make you do the Leonardo DiCaprio meme of him pointing at the TV. This is the only area of the game I've seen noticeable pushback. From the outside looking in, Astrobot can look like nothing more than a self-aware advertisement, but this can't be any further from the truth. This game makes sure to feel like a celebration of video games as an art medium, in the same vein as Smash Bros, but not a pale imitation this time. Astrobot stands on its own 2 feet, giving respect to games of all shapes and sizes. In fact, this celebration makes you want new games for these series, especially if there hasn't been a new release for a hot minute, and it means a lot to you. Now, I don't expect every IP ever made to continue indefinitely, but even I wasn't immune to this feeling. I personally didn't realize how down bad I am for a new Uncharted until I heard this game's remix of its main theme that played during the special Uncharted themed level. It can be a painful reminder to know one of your favorite games isn't getting a new entry anytime soon. However, an Okami sequel was just announced, so I guess anything is possible. Beyond this game's initial appearance, you'll encounter a wide range of power-ups that augment the gameplay in wildly different fashions. This is where the core of variety comes from because there's about a dozen power-ups and you won't see them more than 3 to 4 times. Some of them even appear only once. This variety helps make sure every level has a reason to exist and is filled to the brim with unique set pieces, so that it plays like something you haven't played in a previous level and will stick with you long after you're done playing. I think the charming visuals and wide power-up variety is already enough for most people to call Astrobot an instant classic, but we haven't even covered what really makes this game tick. The secret why this game plays so well isn't because of its proud display of video game history or constant introduction of new mechanics, it's because every second feels curated. Every piece of controls, geometry, animation, particle effects, and sound design is ridiculously well made and polished. There is not a millimeter where something looks half-assed or out of place. We've seen this recently with other games over the last few years, like Mario Wonder or It Takes Two, but I personally think Astrobot sets the quality bar even higher than what those incredible games were able to accomplish beforehand. There's always something going on in the environment, but never enough to be overstimulating. Everything is interactable as well, which makes the game feel like a satisfying toy at every moment. It has the highest FPS of any game I've ever played. Fun per second, that is, although the frames aren't bad either. Honestly, the stable 60 FPS is impressive when you see the number of physics objects that populate each level. This game just casually leaves piles of hundreds of sprinkles, gems, or feathers that are all their own game object instead of being part of something like a particle effect. Most of the time they exist for no other reason than to exist, and I respect it. It just exudes this level of confidence, like the developers of Team Asobi are just flexing and holding themselves back saying, "This isn't even my final form." Where you see the core gameplay really shine is in the button-themed challenge levels. These put different elements of the sandbox you'll have seen in previous levels in new arrangements that are genuinely challenging, even to well-seasoned platformers such as myself, and show off the best of what Astrobot's gameplay is capable of. Each one had me locked in to clear it, and they were definitely the most satisfying levels to beat. The music is also extraordinary. While it's not my favorite soundtrack of the year, it's definitely the catchiest. I have had different tracks pop into my head over the last few months, more from this game than anything else I've played recently or just other music I've listened to in general. All of this magic accumulates into what I would call a Ratatouille moment for anyone over the age of 20. Playing this game will give you intense feelings that bring you back to a time where you were playing a certified hood classic from your childhood. Mario Galaxy does feel like the most prominent inspiration for this game, and I couldn't be happier about it. Between the level select being reminiscent of the Comet Observatory, to the Starball in certain enemies, even the elephant power-up that allows you to create platforms out of thin air is just like the Cloud Flower from Mario Galaxy 2. I'm honestly surprised platformers rarely have a mechanic like this where you get to make your own platforms. It adds a lot of depth to the game since you get to choose how to traverse large chasms. Astrobot even builds off the Cloud Flower's legacy by having different materials give those platforms special shapes and properties. Innovations, such as this, prevent this game from feeling like a cheap knockoff or painfully derivative. Rather, it feels like a spiritual successor that wants to pay respect and evolve what came before, which someone like me has been waiting for at least a decade to play. The other inspiration that felt apparent to me was Kirby. The way Astro can easily take the form of other characters is pretty much what Kirby's been doing for the last 30 years. Also, I know I'm not the first to bring it up, but it is interesting how similar in structure this game is to Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Saving the bots feels like saving the Waddle Dees, almost beat for beat, both in how you save them but also how they both return to a hub world. Both hubs also have a gacha machine as their method of giving their players collectibles in exchange for the game's coin equivalent. I do think both games are deriving from the same source of Japanese pop culture rather than Astro copying Kirby. I do want to point out that it was criminal how publicly underappreciated Kirby and the Forgotten Land was. Like, I know it wasn't ever going to win GOTY against Elden Ring or even God of War Ragnarok, but it didn't even get nominated. But Stray did? It wasn't even entered for Best Music. It is the best-selling Kirby game of all time, but as someone whose favorite game series is Kirby, the lack of public recognition in the larger gaming social sphere kinda stung. To get off that tangent and wrap up my thoughts about Astrobot, I just want to reiterate how good this game feels to play. It's so good that when I went to record footage for this video, I went in thinking, oh, I'll just play a few levels and call it a day. I ended up starting a second save file and 100%ing the whole game again because I just couldn't put it down for the entire weekend. It's really cool that kids today can come home from a long day of school and their choice of games are things like Tears of the Kingdom and Astrobot. Both these games blew my adult mind, but I can't even imagine how much more impactful experiences like these are during your formative years when you don't have a long list of games you can compare it to and are instead the baseline you will compare future experiences to. Games like Astrobot are what inspire kids to become passionate about games as an art medium and will be responsible for the creation of multiple legendary games a few decades from now. Balatro is easily the scariest game I played this year, even more so than witnessing Pyramid Head in 4K. I knew a roguelike that is based on poker would be something I would be unable to put down, therefore when Balatro initially released, I decided to pass on it to save me from myself. However, in November, I felt like I had to play it since it was getting nominated for a lot of awards, and I figured I finally needed a taste of what it was truly about. So I finally bit the bullet and what I feared came into fruition. Over the last few weeks of owning this game, I have put part-time job hours in and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. To start off, there's a respectable amount of progression to sink into. Filling out the collections tab is very satisfying. Completing tasks to unlock jokers and vouchers was fun for me in the beginning since I was excited to see how they would play in future runs. Also, the card art of these cards is really cool. They have so much personality despite having basic designs. They give off a similar vibe to those Gen 3 and 4 Pokemon sprites. It also helps immensely with gameplay readability because it does not take long to recognize most jokers from a quick glance. Beyond that, what makes Balatro so fun for me to play is how many variables there are to customize your experience. You have the different decks and anti-levels, and the 150 jokers are the cornerstone of your builds run. But once you factor in all the different tarot cards, planets, seals, and additions, it feels like there's an infinite amount of ways a run can go. On top of all these variables, another component that makes Balatro special is how easy it is to pivot strategies in the middle of a run. To use Slay the Spire as an example, in that game, after a few cards and relics, you usually have a designated lane you should stick to and build your future rewards around that initial core. In Balatro, I find myself swapping strategies constantly mid-run and finding success doing so. The fact that the sandbox and structure of this game are so malleable make the game a joy to engage with on a second-to-second level. It's like the video game equivalent of silly putty. It can be pulled and stretched into whatever direction you desire. The single goal of needing to clear an always rising score threshold is the last piece of Balatro's DNA that keeps me coming back for more. I know this comparison will sound a little weird, but optimizing my deck to clear antes scratches the same itch as a Borderlands game. In those games, I get most of my fun out of layering character skills with gun effects to try and squeeze out the highest damage possible. After all, what is max DPS but a high score? It's always fun to make that number keep going up. On top of that, the flames that appear when your hand is able to clear the ante also gives me the same satisfaction as scoring critical hits or activating an ultimate ability. It's just the icing on an already perfect cake. If there's one thing that Balatro proves, is that making a game that centralizes around beating a high score will never go out of style. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was the first big new 2024 release I played. It pretty much absorbed all my free time in March, and what a great March it was. I remember I realized this game was something special when I escorted a dog named Salmon with music that went harder than it had any right to. Then I performed corporate espionage with music that also went harder than it had any right to. Then I participated in a card game tournament with music that went harder than it had any right to. Then I fought an alien monster with music that went harder than it had any right to. Then I got to see Tifa and Aerith wearing beachwear with music that went harder than it had any right to. I could keep going until the credits rolled, but I think you get my point. This game just does not let off the gas with crazy fun and just flat out crazy cutscenes and gameplay segments that are accompanied with ridiculously good music. This insane journey is accompanied with an absurd amount of content variety. Usually RPGs have a couple of unique minigames to accompany the core gameplay. Rebirth has a couple dozen. For some reason, this game having a lot of minigame side content was a turnoff for some people. I personally cannot get annoyed with a group of developers who want to fill their game with a wide variety of activities to partake in. Sure, I may not enjoy everything they make, but I can just not engage with it and move on with my day. I think some people struggle with that concept and think every second of a game needs to meet their tastes and standards, no matter how high they may be, which is super egotistical and childish. Now that being said, not all minigames are created equal, and like I said earlier, there were a few that didn't tickle my fancy. I thought the chocobo gliding was horrid compared to something like Galaxy 2's Fluzzard gliding 14 years ago. Gears and Gambit hit me at a point where I didn't really feel like learning new systems that deep while trying to unlock the proto relics, so I found it a bit annoying to play through. However, That was kind of it for my personal minigame related complaints. I loved Fort Condor and the Yuffie DLC, and I enjoyed it here. I thought the game pieces being based off the original game's character models was a really cute touch. The box breaking minigame is another one from the last game I really enjoyed. Optimizing a route to hit all the boxes in the allotted time is a very satisfying challenge to me. The Galactic Saviors game was probably my favorite attraction at the Gold Saucer, but the G-Bike and Chocobo Racing were also pretty fun. Both frog minigames had me smiling the whole time due to their stupidity, and also, why is doing sit-ups as Tifa the second most impressive use of the DualSense controller after Astrobot? Now, the star of the show when it came to bonus content was none other than Queen's Blood. I ignored it completely until the cruise ship section, where I decided to finally give it a try for the tournament. I was like Squidward trying his first Krabby Patty. It was love at first card draw. There's nothing I dislike about Queen's Blood at a conceptual level. The deck building, aesthetic, and music are all top notch. Some cards, like Midgard Stormer, need to be reined in, but that's about it for criticism. The puzzles in Costa del Sol and the modified matches at the Gold Saucer really opened my eyes to how much you could do with this game. This is undeniably the second best card game created this year. The dev team even confirmed Queen's Blood is returning for the next Final Fantasy VII game, and I honestly hope it gets a standalone game after that. On top of these dedicated minigames, the main campaign is littered with unique gameplay segments. There's some really strong moments in these segments, like with the parade march and fighting Palmer from the back of the dune buggy. This is also where the game's worst parts come from. The only parts of this game I can truly say were awful to play were stumbling around at a painfully slow speed during Chapter 1 when Sephiroth is destroying Nibelheim, and throwing boxes as Cait Sith in the mansion's laboratory. While all these small one-off mechanics can be very hit or miss, the core combat gameplay is excellent and is never not excellent. Building up a meter to perform an action is absolutely nothing new, but the way the modern Final Fantasy VII trilogy in the making does it is so satisfying. The importance of using ATB in battle means these games are much closer to being turn-based than I think most people realize. Both the player and enemies' turns build up in real time, and using things like materia and certain basic attacks can affect the rate at which both these sides receive their turn. Also, allowing the player to block and dodge feels much better than just relying on a missed chance. Rebirth maintains most of Remake's foundation, but makes some noticeable balance changes, such as nerfing Tifa's stagger chaining a little bit and making Aerith feel much better to play, with having multiple wards to place and ward teleporting to compensate for her slower movement speed. Beyond these balance changes and new materia, the real star of the additions are the synergy attacks. These add another layer of depth to battles and reward the use of cycling between all your party members instead of just sweeping everything with Tifa, like in Remake. The major synergy attacks are flashy and powerful, making each battle even more of a spectacle, and their bonuses like infinite MP or increasing stagger damage really help turn the tides in boss fights. There are so many combat trials in this game, and while I personally didn't do all of them, I ended up doing a lot of them because the combat system has so much depth to engage with. My only gripe is that materia can be a hassle to swap around, especially in those harder fights when every slot matters, so an improvement for that in the next game would be very appreciated. Outside of the gameplay, this game's characters are a delight to be around and a major highlight of this game's experience. These characters are so well written, voiced, and animated that calling them characters feels like an insult. I could make a separate video on why Barret is my favorite fictional person ever, because there's just that much for me to talk about. The fear and guilt he hides under all that muscle and bravado is just masterfully done. Him putting on his shades to hide the fear in his eyes is what cements what his character's about in a single animation. That's really the extra effort that pushes this game to legendary status for me. Every head tilt, every fist tighten feels so deliberate. You can tell the people who choreograph these scenes are masters of their craft. Everyone's eyes do such a good job displaying their emotions as well. Without a single word said, you can feel the warmth, fear, or hostility radiating from the person or creature. This is honestly super rare in gaming as a whole, to have body language this detailed and expressive. Even other games with high quality animations usually have a little bit of stiffness to them, but outside of a few generic NPCs, this is rarely the case for Rebirth. I mean, just look at Kate Sith and his Moogle. These animations look like each frame is curated like a Pixar movie. The writing also matches the expert quality of the animations. So many dialogue-heavy games recently like Veilguard, Spider-Man 2, and Starfield have a vibe to their writing that reviewers, like Whitelight or SkillUp, have said feel like HR is in the room when it comes to characters talking. Thankfully, Rebirth is not even close to having that level of sanitized writing. Character moments always feel earnest and natural. None of those games I mentioned would even dare to include an interaction such as this.
They said he went missing during a training exercise. But then, the story changed. A couple days later, they started reporting that he was killed in action. Yeah, that was it.
The news outlets are nothing but Shinra mouthpieces spewing propaganda. Only dumbasses believe that shit.
Question. Does that make me a dumbass?
I didn't say that. What I meant was, screw Shinra for manipulating honest folks.
The game does a really good job of balancing its silly and serious moments, and I think Cloud as a central protagonist is what anchors the balance so well. He's got his no-nonsense side with scenes like this.
Cool.
Hey, hold it, you spiky-haired jerkface! Where do you think you're going? I challenge you to a duel!
But then there's a bunch of fun times where Cloud's a complete dork, where I occasionally had to pause the game because I was laughing so hard.
Cloud? Something wrong?
No, nothing. It's just hot. In the sun. Speaking of which, you...
There's also his compassionate layer, which is where his character shines the most, and were easily some of my favorite story moments in the entire game.
Barrett.
He said he wanted me to live with the guilt.
Well, we're here for you.
To help take the load off, huh?
I mean it, man.
Yeah, I'm starting to think you might.
Come on.
If Part 3 sticks the landing, then I believe this will go down as the best gaming trilogy currently made. What really makes this trilogy special is how it's a set of sequels to the original game that is Trojan horsed under the appearance of a remake. Don't get me wrong, these games are still technically remakes since they hit the same major beats as the original game, but the added context that these are also sequels that are technically Final Fantasy VII 2, 3, and 4 gives the experience this extra depth that I personally find to be galaxy-sized brain genius on top of being ridiculously creative. With how many games are being remade or remastered this decade for safe profits, the Final Fantasy VII dev team is really going above and beyond the entire industry. This project is surprisingly bold and risky, and that makes me respect it that much more. I made a theory video earlier in the year that goes further into this topic of this trilogy being a set of sequels and what it all means, and if that interests you, you can check it out through the link in the description. I have a pinned comment on that video that addresses some mistakes I made, but overall I'm happy with how it turned out. Also, the reception was pretty nice, and the comment section had a lot of fun ideas adding to what I said, and honestly a theory video with good discussion and very little vitriol is more than I could have asked for. These modern Final Fantasy VII games are 100% worth trying even if you've never played a Final Fantasy game before. I would know because Remake was my first Final Fantasy game. I don't know what I stumbled into, but it's something I'm very happy I'm able to partake in. To wrap this video up, these 3 games are absolute bangers that I'm confident will stand the test of time, since they all bring something new to the medium that you can't get anywhere else. These games are also not trying to appeal to everybody, so while you may not end up liking some or all of these games, the people these projects do resonate with will resonate hard and be something that sticks with them for the rest of their lives. To anyone still watching, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. This video was meant to release 2 weeks ago, but I got a cold that left me with a bad lingering cough and some sinus pain. I'm all good now and have many videos planned for next year, so stay tuned for those. Anyways, thanks for watching and have a good day.